Have you ever heard of a place so mysterious that people whisper about it in the dark? A place where strange lights flicker in the sky and secrets are hidden deep underground? Welcome to Area 51, a secret base in the Nevada desert that has sparked countless stories of aliens and unusual happenings. As you listen to this tale, imagine what it would be like to stand at the edge of this mysterious land, where the unknown lurks just beyond the horizon. If you enjoy this story, be sure to subscribe and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. Get cozy, and let's dive into the strange world of Area 51. In the heart of the Nevada desert, surrounded by tall mountains and endless sand, lies a place that many people have heard of but few have seen. This place is called Area 51. It is a secret military base, and from the outside, it looks like any other dusty patch of land. But what happens inside those tall fences is what makes people shiver with fear and excitement. Many years ago, a man named Bob Lazar claimed he worked at Area 51. He said he saw flying saucers and strange machines that looked like they came from another planet. Bob told everyone that the government was hiding aliens and their technology. He spoke about how these flying saucers could zoom through the sky faster than anything we know. People were both amazed and frightened by his words. Could it be true? Were there really aliens at Area 51? One night, a group of friends decided to take a trip to see the mysterious Area 51 for themselves. They packed their bags, filled their car with snacks, and set off into the desert. As they drove closer, the air felt different. The sky turned dark, and the stars twinkled like tiny eyes watching them. The friends laughed and joked, but deep down they felt a little nervous. When they arrived at the edge of Area 51, they found a tall fence with signs that warned them to stay away. No trespassing. Violators will be shot, the signs read. The friends looked at each other, excitement bubbling inside them. They knew they shouldn't go in, but curiosity got the better of them. They decided to sneak a little closer. As they crept along the fence, they heard strange noises coming from inside. It sounded like humming and buzzing, like a giant bee was trapped in a cage. They stopped and listened, their hearts pounding. Suddenly, a bright light shot up into the sky, illuminating the desert. The friends gasped and ducked down, hiding behind a bush. What was that light? Was it a spaceship? The light danced across the sky, twisting and turning in ways that seemed impossible. The friends watched in awe and fear, their minds racing. What if they see us? One whispered. What if the aliens come for us? They all held their breath, too scared to move. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the light vanished, leaving the night sky dark and still. The friends looked at each other, their eyes wide with wonder and fear. Let's go back, one said, but another insisted they stay a little longer. They wanted to see more. Just then, they heard footsteps approaching. The friends froze as shadows moved near the fence. They could see figures in uniforms, carrying flashlights. "We need to get out of here," someone whispered urgently. They turned to run, but before they could escape, the lights flashed on them. The figures shouted, "You're not allowed here. Get out!" The friends sprinted away, their hearts racing. They could hear the footsteps behind them getting closer and closer. They dashed through the desert, stumbling over rocks and sand, desperate to escape. Finally, they reached their car, jumped inside, and locked the doors. They started the engine and sped away, the dust flying behind them. As they drove back to safety, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. They glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a spaceship following them. The next day, they shared their adventure with their friends, but no one believed them. They laughed and called them silly. But deep down, the friends knew what they had seen. They had experienced something strange and terrifying at Area 51, a place where secrets are hidden and the unknown lurks in the shadows. And so, the legend of Area 51 grew, filled with tales of aliens, flying saucers, and mysterious happenings. People continued to wonder what was really going on behind those tall fences. Were there aliens? Were they watching us? The questions lingered, leaving a chill in the air. As the friends lay in bed that night, they couldn't help but glance out their windows at the starry sky. They wondered if the aliens were out there, watching them, waiting for the next curious soul to venture too close to their secrets. And that, dear listeners, is the story of Area 51, a place that holds many mysteries and scares, reminding us that sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. So, what do you think? Would you dare to visit a place like Area 51? The next morning, the friends sat at the kitchen table, their eyes puffy from lack of sleep. They couldn't shake the images from the night before. The light in the sky, the strange sounds, and those shadowy figures felt like they were stuck in their minds. As they talked about their adventure, each of them slowly began to remember details that sent chills down their spines. "Did you hear that humming?" one of them asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The others nodded, recalling how the noise seemed to wrap around them, vibrating through their bones. It wasn't just any noise. It felt different, almost alive, like something was trying to communicate. "I can't stop thinking about the lights," another friend admitted. "It wasn't like anything we've seen before. They moved in ways that felt unnatural," the others agreed, and the air in the room grew heavy with unease. They had ventured too close to something beyond their understanding, and now it felt like the world around them had shifted. That afternoon, they decided to research Area 51. They gathered around a laptop in the living room, searching for videos and stories. As they clicked through images of the base, they stumbled upon a grainy video of a supposed alien encounter. The video showed blurred figures moving quickly, shadows slipping in and out of view. The friends exchanged nervous glances as they watched. Their hearts raced, and they could almost hear the eerie hum they heard the night before echoing in their minds. Suddenly, one of them cried out, pointing at the screen. "Look, what is that?" The video showed a bizarre figure standing under the flashing lights, its eyes glowing like two small suns. It looked thin, almost fragile, yet there was something powerful about it. The friends leaned closer, unable to look away, as the footage seemed to draw them into a trance. They spoke about what could happen if they went back, their voices low and serious. "What if we really saw an alien?" one said, half joking but half scared. "What would it want with us?" Each question lingered in the air, becoming more serious. The deeper they dug into the legend of Area 51, the more unsettling the stories became. People claimed to have seen UFOs, to have encountered beings that looked like the ones in their video. As the sun set that evening, the shadows grew longer, creeping into their lives like the secrets of Area 51. With every passing hour, they felt a pull, a want to return to the strange place that had captured their imagination and set their hearts racing. They couldn't shake the feeling that they were meant to see more. Finally, they made a unanimous decision. "We have to go back tonight," one declared, his face determined. The others hesitated, but excitement sparked in their eyes. They weren't just curious anymore. They were desperate to unravel the mystery. As they gathered their flashlights and snacks again, a chill ran down their spines, but this time, it mixed with a thrill that made them feel alive. The desert was quiet that night, the moon glowing bright above them, casting long shadows across the terrain. As they drove toward Area 51 once more, the headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the road ahead, but the feeling of dread weighed heavily in the car. Tensions ran high as they neared the fence. This time, however, they were well prepared. Their excitement overshadowed the fear. They parked farther away from the gate, hoping to avoid the watchful eyes of whoever was guarding the place. As they walked, the air felt thick, electric with anticipation. The humming noises echoed faintly in the distance, sending shivers through them. It was more than just simple curiosity. It felt like destiny, as if something was calling them to uncover its secrets. The friends approached the fence, hearts thumping loudly in their chests. They took a deep breath, whispering to one another, "We can do this." They squeezed through a gap in the fence and stepped into the forbidden area. Immediately, the temperature dropped, and an eerie stillness blanketed everything. They turned on their flashlights, beams slicing through the darkness, revealing old crates and discarded equipment lying forgotten. As they moved further inside, they heard the haunting sound of what seemed like voices carried on the wind. It wasn't clear enough to understand, but it sent chills down their spines. "We should turn back," one friend insisted, his voice shaky. But another declared, "No way. We've come this far. We can't leave now." Suddenly, a bright light blazed behind them, and they whipped around, startled. It wasn't the moon or a car. It was like the sun had suddenly risen right beside them. The light pulsed rhythmically, casting strange shadows that danced eerily across the landscape. They realized they were not alone. "Run!" someone shouted, and they didn't hesitate. They sprinted toward the fence, adrenaline coursing through their veins. As they ran, the light grew brighter and closer, illuminating a figure that stood watching them. It was tall and thin, just like the ones they had seen in the grainy video, its eyes glowing with a mysterious light. Fear surged through them as they dashed for safety, crashing through the bushes, desperate to escape. The ground felt alive under their feet, each step sending a wave of panic through their bodies. They could hear the sounds of heavy breathing behind them, as if the very air was reaching out to grab them. Just as they reached the car, the light flickered off, plunging them into darkness. They scrambled inside, yelling at the driver to hurry. The engine roared to life, and they sped away into the night, hearts racing and breaths ragged. They didn't talk on the way back, lost in their thoughts, each of them staring out at the night sky, wondering what they had just encountered. What had they seen? Was it really an alien? Or just their imaginations running wild? And as they wrapped themselves in the safety of their homes, they could still feel that chill creeping into their bones, an unsettling reminder of the mysteries at Area 51. The question lingered in the air as they tried to sleep. Would the strange beings they glimpsed ever come back? Would they be forever entwined with the secrets hidden in the shadows of the Nevada desert? The friends could not shake the overwhelming sense of unease that settled over them. For days, they kept to their routines, but every slight noise seemed amplified, and every flickering light felt like a warning. They exchanged stories about their experience, and yet none of it felt real. It was as if they had stepped into a movie, but the uneasiness never faded. One night, the bravest of them suggested another trip back. "Maybe we missed something," he said, though his voice trembled. The others hesitated but quickly agreed, curiosity clawing at them once more. Each of them had kept a secret. Their dreams had been invaded by thoughts of the glowing figure, the pulsing light, and the haunting sounds. As the day turned into night once again, they set off. The air felt thick with anticipation, and the road ahead seemed darker than ever. They parked in the same spot as before, stepping out into the cool desert night. This time, however, they went deeper into the base, led by an irresistible pull to uncover the truth. They moved cautiously, flashlights illuminating the ground ahead as they ventured away from the familiar path and deeper into the heart of Area 51. Suddenly, they stumbled upon an old hangar, its doors slightly ajar. A sense of dread enveloped them, but an uncontrollable curiosity pushed them forward. As they entered, the lights flickered on, revealing rows of vehicles that looked like nothing they had ever seen before. They were unlike any cars or planes known to man, sleek with shapes that defied logic. "Do you think these are alien crafts?" one friend breathed, awe shining through his fear. They inched closer, hands trembling as they reached out to touch the cool metal surface. Just then, they heard a faint noise, like whispers circling around them. The friends exchanged panicked looks, their eyes wide with fear. "Did you hear that?" Another friend gasped, clutching his flashlight like a lifeline. The whispering grew louder, filling the hangar with an unsettling cacophony of voices, too soft to decipher, but filled with urgency. Suddenly, a metallic clang echoed from the far end of the hangar, causing them all to jump. They turned their lights toward the sound, catching a glimpse of shadows flitting past the far wall. "We need to leave now," someone shouted, but before they could turn, the lights above flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness once more. Panic surged through them as they scrambled for the exit, the air thick with fear and confusion. Their flashlights flickered, barely cutting through the suffocating blackness, and they could hear the whispers growing louder, almost echoing their own fright. Just then, the door slammed shut with a resounding bang, and they were trapped. The friends slammed their bodies against it, pushing and pulling in a frenzy, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if something was keeping them inside, holding them in place. Then, the dim glow reappeared, revealing a figure standing at the far end of the hangar. They squinted into the light, the glowing presence shifting and shimmering like a mirage. It stood tall, its elongated limbs and radiant eyes calling to them, an otherworldly being that seemed to grow closer with every breath. The friends were frozen, their hearts pounding wildly as they felt the weight of its gaze upon them. The voice they had heard before grew clearer, though they still couldn't understand the words. It felt like an invitation, a chance to know something beyond human comprehension. But with it came fear. Would they be forever changed if they stepped closer? Would they return to their homes, altered by what lay beyond their understanding? An electric tension filled the air, and they felt as if they were standing on the edge of something extraordinary and terrifying. And just as the glowing figure seemed about to reveal some great truth, their flashlights died, the darkness swallowing them whole. Panic surged anew, voices echoed. Desperate cries cut through the silence. They felt something pulsating around them, filling the space like a cold wave crashing against their skin. "We have to break out," someone cried, and they resumed slamming their bodies against the door, voices merging into a chaotic urgency. But the whispers grew louder, enveloping them, each word becoming an insistent chant that echoed in their minds. Suddenly, the hangar door burst open, flooding the room with light, and they stumbled out into the cool night air. Regaining their footing, they bolted outside, abandoning any thought of exploring further. Once outside, they found themselves standing under a sky speckled with stars, but the glow of that otherworldly being remained etched in their minds. They ran to the car, breathless, hearts thundering as they sped away from Area 51 once more, leaving behind the mystery that haunted them. Back in the safety of their homes, they tried to speak about what had happened, but the words failed them. The experiences they shared felt surreal, as if they had stepped into a different world. Days passed, and sleep eluded them. They would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, hearing the echo of the whispers and the flash of the glowing presence. They grew jittery and avoided each other, their friendship strained under the weight of their shared secret. The story they had once thought was an adventure had become a nightmare. It wasn't long before they discovered that strange things began happening. One friend started seeing shadows out of the corner of his eye. Another claimed to hear faint whispers calling out to him in the middle of the night. They started to fear they had awakened something, stirred like a sleeping giant by their curiosity. After days of silence, they agreed to meet again, gathering reluctantly at a small cafe. Each of them appeared more tired, haunted by the weight of that fateful night. "Do you think we brought something back with us?" one asked, looking down at the table. The others didn't answer, but exchanged uneasy glances. As their discussion grew more intense, the cafe dimmed, the lights flickering, and their hearts sank as they felt something swirl around them, a heavy presence that sent shivers racing down their spines. They struggled to comprehend what was happening, but it was as if the very walls whispered their hidden fears, drowning them in uncertainty. How could they escape this feeling of being watched, hunted even? Their conversations soon turned into confessions about the dreams that had haunted them night after night. Each friend shared their experiences, the strange sights, the sounds, and the overwhelming fear that followed. And then, one of them, shaking slightly, whispered the most terrifying thought out loud. "What if it comes for us?" A chill settled in the air, and dread wrapped around their hearts. They could almost feel the weight of unseen eyes tracking their every movement. Determined not to become victims of their fears, they tried to devise a plan, a way to confront whatever would come for them. "We need to go back, face it together," one said, trying to sound brave. But deep down, they were filled with trepidation. "Let's go back, face it together," one said, trying to sound brave. But deep down, they were filled with trepidation. The thought of returning to Area 51 made their skin crawl. Still, curiosity mingled with fear, making it impossible to change their minds. Each of them silently acknowledged the urge to confront the mystery that had invaded their lives. The group reconvened later that week, determined to return to the dark heart of the desert. As dusk settled, they packed their gear, their bodies tense with a combination of excitement and dread. In the car, an oppressive silence hung over them, each lost in their thoughts as the landscape slipped by, shadows stretching long under the fading light. The isolation of the desert was palpable, wrapping them in a blanket of uneasiness as they headed toward the base. When they arrived at the familiar fence, the moon cast eerie shadows and the wind whispered through the sagebrush. Their flashlights flickered on, beams cutting sharply through the deepening darkness, illuminating the path they had taken before. Each step felt heavier, much harder to take as they approached the place that loomed large in their minds. Memories of the last experience flooded back, the fear they had felt now pulsing through their veins. As they slipped through the gap in the fence, the atmosphere shifted, creating an almost tangible tension that crackled in the air. The sounds of the desert faded into an unsettling hush as they ventured further into the heart of Area 51, echoing footsteps amplified by the quiet night. They followed the same path as before, but this time everything felt different, warped, as if the very ground beneath them were alive and shifting beneath their feet. Deeper into the facility, they stumbled upon an old access road, its rusted signs barely legible under years of neglect. Despite the overwhelming fear that coursed through them, they pressed on, compelled by the mysterious weight of the unseen presence that hung around them. Each rustle of leaves or distant echo made her heart race like a jackhammer, fear gnawing at their resolve. They spotted the hangar again, its silhouette looming like a beast against the starry sky. This time, however, the air felt charged, electric. Something was waiting for them, hidden in the shadows, and they could almost sense its anticipation. The group paused at the entrance, exchanging glances filled with both terror and resolve. They took a collective breath, hands trembling, before stepping inside once more. As the door creaked open, the heavy metallic smell wafted toward them, familiar, yet laced with a sense of danger. Their flashlights revealed rows of strange vehicles, nearly identical to the ones from their previous encounter. But now, there were new additions amongst them, metallic shapes that seemed wrong, twisted, almost organic in nature. It sent a chill down their spines, the sensation of being watched sharpened, prickling at the back of their necks. Suddenly, a sound broke the silence, a low, droning noise that rose and fell like the pulsing of a heartbeat. It reverberated through the air, deep and unsettling, wrapping around them like a predator closing in for the kill. The friends looked at each other, wide-eyed, as the noise grew louder, almost demanding attention. "What is that?" one whispered, barely able to contain the tremor in his voice. The others shook their heads, a bond of fear and adrenaline binding them in the dark. They pressed deeper into the hangar, the atmosphere thick and suffocating, urging them to move forward, despite their instinct to flee. Then, without warning, the lights flickered overhead, briefly illuminating the space in a strobe-like fashion. Shadows danced around them, warping into shapes that felt almost alive. Their breath quickened as the figures behind them began to swirl, forming a tapestry of darkness. A gut-wrenching feeling gripped them. It was no longer just shadows. It was something tangible, something that was forming a grip on their reality. "Get out!" someone shouted, and they turned to flee. Instinct took over, and they sprinted towards the exit, adrenaline pumping through their veins. But the door slammed shut behind them, the sound echoing like a death knell. The air grew colder, every breath visible as their panic intensified. Desperate, they fumbled for the door, even as they heard that droning noise shift into a series of whispers, incomprehensible yet insistent. It felt like the walls themselves were closing in, and every instinct screamed for them to run. They turned back to the room, scrambling for an alternative exit, but the hangar twisted in on itself, creating shadows that seemed determined to keep them inside. Then, from the depths of darkness, a figure emerged, its form shimmering in the flickering lights. It was tall, impossibly thin, its outline unsettlingly fluid, almost like it was made of smoke rather than solid matter. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, illuminating the corners of the hangar in a ghostly hue. The friends froze, paralyzed by a mixture of fear and fascination. Do you see that? One of them whispered, his voice trembling. They watched as the entity moved, its presence shifting seamlessly, gliding just above the ground. The whispers grew louder, now forming syllables that dripped with urgency. "Help us," they seemed to say, echoing in their minds, wrapping around their consciousness like a vine. "I can't take this anymore," one friend shouted, breaking the spell. "We have to get out now." He lunged towards the door, but it remained steadfast, as unyielding as the growing dread that filled the air. The glowing figure stepped closer, its luminous eyes boring into theirs, drawing them in like moths to a flame. "Help us," it echoed again, and this time they felt an icy grip take hold of their hearts. The voice resonated in their very souls, an unspoken plea that thrummed with desperation. Something profound lay behind those words, something that hinted at a tragedy, a torment that transcended time. Panic surged again as the friends turned to each other, their breaths ragged. There was a shared understanding in the air, a mutual recognition that they were no longer in control of the situation. "What do we do?" someone whispered, and their eyes darted back to the figure. It seemed to sway gently, the very fabric of reality warping around it. "Find the truth or be consumed," it whispered, and the words slithered through their minds, dissecting their resolve. It felt like a choice, a temptation, hanging heavy in the air like storm clouds before an impending downpour. With uncertainty and unease churning in their stomachs, they hesitated, time stretching infinitely as the entity loomed before them. They were trapped between fear and a desperate need to understand. Was this being a prisoner, much like themselves, or something more sinister, luring them into an unknown darkness? Just then, one of their phones buzzed, breaking the tension. It was a message from a friend, someone who hadn't joined them this time. "Stay away from Area 51. Weird things are happening. People are going missing," it read. The weight of the warning hit them like a physical blow. "No," they cried out in unison, the voice of the entity growing louder, more insistent. "Help us!" The urgency dripped with menace. And finally, one friend shouted, "I refuse to be a part of this." They lunged for the door once more, pushing against the solid barrier, but it wouldn't give. And then, the hangar began to tremble, a low rumble echoing through the space, as if the very foundation was alive with anger. The walls seemed to pulse with energy, shadows twisting and turning as the figure surged forward, reaching out with arms that stretched like tendrils of smoke. "Help us," it cried one last time, the air charged with energy, and they felt pushed back by an invisible force, stumbling and gasping. Their hearts raced as they began to understand. Whatever this entity wanted, it was willing to take drastic measures to get it. Fear surged anew, filling every inch of their bodies, each beat of their hearts screaming for them to escape. Amidst the chaos, the hangar door finally swung open with a deafening crash, spilling moonlight into the room. Without hesitation, they bolted forward, adrenaline kicking their legs into a sprint. They dashed through the opening, the fresh air hitting their faces like a welcome reprieve, but somehow they could still feel that unsettling presence at their backs. They pounded across the open desert, hearts racing as they leaped over rocks and bushes, driven by sheer panic. But the memories haunted them, the whispers echoing in their minds as they raced toward the car. They fumbled for the keys, feeling clumsy with fear, the weight of their souls dragging them down. Just as they opened the car doors, a chilling laugh pierced the night air, cutting through the silence like a blade. It echoed around them, rising and falling like waves, leaving the friends frozen in place. They looked at each other, fear etched on all their faces, realizing they had crossed a line from which they could never return. The laughter faded into the wind, but the shadows in the desert grew thicker, swirling around them like predator and prey, and the friends knew it was not over. The truth they sought lay somewhere in the dark, entangled with their lives now, hard to escape. They had opened a door to something that would not let them go that easily. And that pulse of darkness would follow them long after they left Area 51, haunting them in their dreams and lurking at the edge of their reality. What would happen next? Would they uncover the mystery or become part of the shadows they had awoken? As each of them drove away into the vast expanse of the desert, they couldn't shake the feeling that the entity, the glow, the laughter, all of it, waited in the whispers of the night, waiting for them to return. And deep in their hearts echoed a realization. They were forever entwined with the enigma of Area 51, caught in a web of secrets best left alone, and the darkness was not finished with them yet. As the days turned into weeks, their lives became a tangled web of anxiety and dread. The friends struggled to return to normalcy, but each time night fell, the whispers returned, soft and insistent in the hollows of their minds. They couldn't escape the penetrating weight of those shadows. It felt as if the desert was calling to them, summoning them back to its depths where the truth lay hidden beneath layers of fear and mystery. One night, unable to sleep, one of them, Emily, decided to research the area further. She sat alone at her desk, the light from her screen casting long shadows in the room. As she scrolled through blogs and articles about Area 51, increasingly bizarre accounts emerged. Stories of missing persons, strange sightings, and unexplainable phenomena reported by those who had dared to linger too long near the base. She felt a chill creep up her spine and closed her laptop, her heart racing as voices echoed in her mind. "Help us! Help us!" 6 nights later, against her better judgment and feeling drawn by unexplainable forces, she contacted the others. "We need to talk," she texted, her fingers trembling. When they met, their unease was palpable. Only a few days had passed, but it felt as though a lifetime had curled around their memories, warping time itself. "I found something," Emily whispered, looking over her shoulder as if the walls could hear her secrets. "It said that the closer you get, the more you lose yourself." It was like a warning. Mark leaned forward, his brow furrowed with worry. "What do you mean?" There were references to doppelgangers and ways people would return changed or not at all. "We've already seen glimpses of it." The group grew quiet, glancing unknowingly at each other as doubt seeped into their minds. "What if something followed us back?" Jake murmured, breaking the silence like a fragile thread snapping. "We can't keep running," Emily replied, voice trembling with urgency. "We have to figure out what it wants before it takes us. But we must go back to that hangar." The idea hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Their hearts raced as they played out the thought of returning to the desert where they were once terrified to the point of paralysis. But unease twisted within them, and the fear of the unknown became a living thing. That very night, they decided to return once more. With a sense of grim determination, they rummaged through their belongings, gathering anything they thought might be useful. Flashlights, extra batteries, a camera, even a small radio, just in case. A part of them hoped they might get proof of the whispers, the laughter, or whatever darkness lingered beyond the hangar. The drive felt longer than before. Each mile felt like they were crossing an invisible line, into another realm where time and sanity stretched thin. As they reached the spot, the car headlights illuminated the fence that stood like a sentinel against the night. Tension replaced their previous confidence, and hesitation froze them in place. "No more running," Emily finally said, steeling herself. This time, as they slipped through the fence, the air tasted different. It crackled with an unseen energy that set their nerves on edge. The pathway, once familiar, felt like a maze designed to ensnare them in its depths. Shadows slithered along the ground like serpents, crawling toward them, beckoning them to enter the unknown. Upon reaching the hangar, they paused at the entrance, a haunting reminder of the terror they had once faced. Together, Emily insisted, gripping the hands of those around her. They stepped inside as a unit, hearts pounding in unison, flashlights sweeping the space where countless secrets festered. The buzzing sound returned, low and ominous, wrapping around them like a fog. It seemed to pulse with the building tension in the room, vibrating beneath their feet. It felt like the hangar itself was alive, a monster biding its time. They shone their lights down the aisles of strange vehicles, but the cars felt absently still. This time, there was no glow, no figure waiting in the corner. All they felt was an oppressive silence, a stillness that pressed upon them like a weight. "Where is it?" one of them whispered, uncertainty creeping into his voice. Before Emily could answer, the air shifted. The whispers ignited, now clearer than before, mixing with the sound of the droning noise that had haunted them. "Help us!" It was no longer a plea. It was a command that hung heavy in the atmosphere. "Maybe it wants us to find something," Emily suggested, though her voice was muffled by the rising dread. They started moving cautiously toward a far corner, drawn by the sound like moths to a flickering flame. As they neared the back of the hangar, the shadows deepened, pulling away as if they were alive. And then, at the edge of their lights, they found something unusual, a trapdoor tucked away beneath a thin layer of dust. It barely registered in their minds, but it sent a chilling tickle up their spines. "Should we open it?" Jake said, glancing around nervously. Emily nodded, feeling a strange compulsion to do so. They all gathered around the door, adrenaline coursing through their veins as Emily bravely knelt down, silently pleading with herself for courage. She lifted the hatch slowly, the hinges creaking like a ghostly wail piercing the quiet. A rush of cold air billowed up as the door opened, carrying a hint of decay and something sweeter, acrid almost, that made them recoil. The darkness below felt tangible, stretching into an abyss illuminated by a light emanating from deep within. "What do you think is down there?" Mark said, swallowing hard as uncertainty twisted in his gut. "I don't know, but we need to find out," Emily insisted, her breath quickening. One by one, they descended into the unknown, flashlights illuminating the narrow staircase that spiraled deep into blackness. Each step felt precarious, a descent into madness as the droning noise swelled around them. With each step, that feeling of being watched multiplied, 1,000 unseen eyes boring into their souls as they ventured deeper. The passage felt endless, wrapping around like a serpent, leading them further from the world above. The walls were damp, the air confined and heavy with a smell of metal and something rotten, suffocating their thoughts. It was as if they were entering a living entity that pulsed and throbbed with an ancient dread. Finally, they reached a small chamber illuminated by an eerie glow emanating from strange symbols carved into the floor. The light twisted and pulsed in rhythm, casting shadows that danced frantically around them, as if it was a heartbeat, synchronizing with their racing pulses. For a moment, they were captivated, entranced by the glow that seemed to invite them closer, even as their minds screamed for them to escape. "What is this place?" Mark breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. Suddenly, the glow flickered out, plunging them into total darkness. Panic erupted as the whispers returned, louder and more desperate, rising above their frantic breathing. "Help us! Help us!" it screamed, crashing over them like a wave and drowning their thoughts. In the thick darkness, cold hands grasped their ankles, sending jolts of shock through their bodies. The friends scrambled, trying to escape the unseen torment that clawed at their feet. But whatever haunted this chamber had awakened, insatiable and eager for more. "No, we have to go!" Emily shouted, her mind racing with fear. She felt the pull of something sinister, something that wanted to entrap them in this darkness. Each friend fought against the unseen force, frantically climbing back up the steps, choking on fear and regret. The whispers became screams, and the shadows surged around them, tugging at their clothes, clawing at their skin, dragging them down into the abyss. Finally, they broke free, lunging across the threshold of the hatch, slamming the trapdoor shut behind them as they gasped for air. They stumbled out into the hangar, hearts pounding and breathless. Their eyes darted toward the shadows, fear locking away every rational thought. But before they could process what had just occurred, They heard it again, the laughter, that haunting sound weaving through the air like smoke, echoing from the depths of the hangar. It was the sound of something that had awakened, something that insisted they stay in its realm forever. The shadows danced around them, swirling like a tempest ready to consume everything in its path. "We have to get out now," Mark yelled, pushing through the fear as they sprinted toward the exit, voices echoing behind them, relentless and deafening. Each step felt like a footfall into a terrifying abyss, but they could not slow down. They darted through the doorway and into the desert, breathing in the cool air that felt like a balm against their frayed nerves. But as they clambered into the car, the laughter grew louder, and they felt it again. Something brushed against their minds like an icy hand. "You can't escape," it whispered, slithering into their consciousness. With a newfound urgency, they drove faster down the road, but the glow illuminated the shadows beyond the windshield, lurking just out of sight. In that moment, they realized the darkness had claimed them, leaving behind an echo of laughter that would haunt every waking moment, reminding them of the abyss they had dared to traverse. And as the desert closed around them, the chilling truth settled. Their stories were just beginning. The car sped down the road, tires screeching against the asphalt, but it felt as if every ounce of their speed was futile. A storm swirled around them, promising to drown them in unseen terrors. With each passing mile, the shadows in the rear-view mirror thickened, twisting into forms that flickered at the edges of perception. They could almost see their own shapes lurking behind them, faces twisted with torment, mouths moving silently, whispering secrets only the darkness could understand. "Look out!" Emily screamed, breaking through the heartbeat of fear that filled the car. Mark swerved, barely avoiding a figure that appeared to dart across the road. An illusion or real? They couldn't tell anymore. The pulse of terror pushed them to the brink as dread coiled around their throats like a noose. "Keep going," Jake yelled, voice shaking. He squinted into the dark, eyes darting, as if searching for some sign of safety ahead. The highway stretched into infinity, the stars hidden behind a curtain of clouds that appeared to shift and swirl with a life of its own. The once familiar landscape now felt foreign, a barren wasteland that whispered promises of despair. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life, static bursting into the confined space. They all jumped, heartbeats synchronizing with the rhythmic thumping of their panic. Voices tangled in the distortion, speaking in hurried tones that felt both urgent and ominous. "Help us, don't let them take you," the radio blared, slipping into the harsh, garbled noise before fading away again into silence. "What the hell was that?" Mark shouted, skin prickling with goosebumps. "It sounded like those voices," Jake replied, panic lacing his words. "Just drive. Don't stop," Emily urged, twisting her hands into fists. But even then, they could feel it, something deeper than just fear pressing onto them. The air grew heavy, crackling with that same energy they had felt in the hangar. It seeped through the windows, wrapping around them, restless and hungry. As they drove, a fog began to roll in, thick and relentless. It shrouded the landscape outside, turning the world into a black and white nightmare. Headlights perished against the smothering mist, leaving them unable to see more than a few feet ahead. And within that fog, shadows emerged, slinking across the road like serpents. Figures appeared and disappeared, their shapes twisted and grotesque, making it impossible to discern what was real and what was a figment of their tormented minds. One moment there was nothing, and the next, they saw a reflection staring back from the path ahead, a dreamlike visage that looked eerily familiar. Mark slammed on the brakes. The car skidded to a stop, tires squealing against the unforgiving surface. "What was that?" he gasped, wide-eyed, trembling as he pointed at the apparition standing just outside the reach of their headlights. There, partially obscured by the thickening mist, stood a doppelganger of Emily. Yet somehow, this figure had an otherworldly quality. Its skin shimmered with a ghostly light, and its eyes glowed unnaturally bright, mirroring Emily's features, but twisted with a haunting grin that spread across its face like a dark secret. "Emily," it said, voice echoing eerily through the fog, chilling them to the bone. "Get away from it," Jake yelled, panic slicing through his tone as he grasped Emily's arm. But she was frozen, entranced by the creature that mirrored her image. As if sensing their fear, the figure stepped forward, the fog swirling as it moved. "Help us," it echoed, stretching out a hand that seemed to flicker and fade, existing simultaneously in two worlds. Pairs of hands reached out from within the mist, twisting and writhing in a desperate plea, urging them closer. "No!" Emily gasped, breaking free from her paralysis, heart pounding violently against her chest. She could feel the weight of the other self tugging at her mind, an overwhelming sense of longing creeping into her thoughts. "We need to go." Mark clutched the wheel, eyes darting in all directions. "What the hell are we dealing with?" As they fumbled for the doors, the whispers intensified, clawing through the air. "You were chosen, join us." The sound seeped into their bones, robbing them of their willpower, dragging them towards something darker. Jake turned toward the back seat, heart hammering wildly. "This isn't happening. This can't be real." He flung the door open, stumbling into the thick fog. The cool air smothered his senses, but he stood firm against the waves of nausea threatening to overwhelm him. "Jake, come back!" Mark shouted, but it was too late. Jake already felt the pull of the fog, the way it curled around him like a lover's embrace, inviting him deeper into its cold, comforting fold. As if sensing weakness, the doppelganger of Emily started to laugh. The sound crackled through the air, weaving malevolence into the fog, seeming to tug at Jake's resolve, dark energy filling the space between them. "Let go," it whispered. "We are waiting for you." Meanwhile, Mark and Emily watched in horror as Jake shifted on his feet, momentarily entranced. "Jake!" Emily pushed through the mist, reaching out toward her friend, her voice breaking with fear. "Come back!" And just then, an unnerving silence permeated the air, enveloping them like a shroud. The echoes of distant laughter faded, offering only the sound of their breath and the thundering drums of their hearts. The fog swirled thicker around them, and the outlines of the figures shifted like specters. Panic surged as Emily grabbed Mark's arm. "We need to do something," but a low rumbling sound started to echo through the atmosphere, shaking the ground beneath their feet. "It's coming," Mark whispered, eyes darting toward Jake, who stood frozen, his silhouette barely visible in the fog. "Join us." The voices droned again, voices of those who had vanished, who had been lost to the darkness. The refrain rose and fell like an ancient chant, pulling at the strands of their sanity, urging them to give in. "No, we're not joining anything," Emily shouted defiantly. But as the shadows grew more pronounced, they felt the energy shift, creating a suffocating weight that pressed down on them. They stumbled backward, fighting against the magnetic draw of the beckoning figures, yet they could feel their willpower waning. It was as if the shadows needed an offering, a sacrifice, a connection to pull them deeper into the unknown. The very fabric of their reality began to tremble as Jake's silhouette flickered, balancing between their world and whatever lay beyond. "Come back!" Emily cried, desperate tears spilling down her cheeks as she reached through the swirling fog. Just then, as the shadows crept forward, a sudden gust of wind blew through the area, whipping the fog backwards in a violent motion. Jake blinked, finally snapping out of his stupor, and his fear-laden gasp cut through the air. Before he could react, the mist shifted again, the figure of Emily's doppelganger lunging toward him. Its expression twisted with hunger, eyes glimmering with a malevolent delight, a beacon of dark intent. "No!" Mark screamed, grabbing Jake by the arm. "Get in the car!" With a surge of adrenaline, they all rushed back toward the vehicle, the shadows clawing for them with icy fingers. Each step felt like a fight against time itself, as the laughter dissolved into maniacal screeches mingled with whispers demanding their surrender. They finally clambered into the car, and Mark cranked the engine. The roar cut through the air like a battle cry, and fog swirled violently around them. Go! Go! Mark slammed the pedal, and the car surged forward, tires spinning and screeching against the gravel as they tore down the road, away from the claustrophobic mist that loomed over the horizon. But the laughter continued to trail behind like a malignant shadow, promising that their ordeal was far from over, that something lingered, something hungry for their return. As they raced away into the desert night, the unease settled heavily over them, a chain of fear that would bind them forever. The truth of what they had encountered took root in their minds. The darkness would follow, making its home in their thoughts, ready to strike when they least expected it. And as they drove into the unknown, they could hear it again, the whispers creeping into their consciousness, taunting them with what awaited back at Area 51. They were connected by a darkness that would not rest. The shadows promised to come for them, willing to blur the lines between reality and nightmare until all that remained was the ache of their own fear. Every breath they took echoed in harmony with the whispers, reminding them of one chilling fact. No matter how far they ran, they could never truly escape what was buried beneath the surface, patiently waiting to reclaim them. The desert night enveloped them as panic crashed like waves against their hearts. Mark gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white, eyes straining against the darkness ahead. The road stretched on, empty and desolate, every shadow greedily reaching toward them. The silence felt oppressive, a weight that crushed their thoughts, and even the rhythmic hum of the engine grew eerie, turning into a hypnotic drone that clawed at their sanity. "Did you see it?" Jake's voice broke through the haze. The thing that looked like Emily? "Yeah," she breathed, still reeling from the horror of the encounter. "That's what scared me the most. It knew us. What if it's still out there? What if it follows us?" Mark's voice trembled, the fear now palpable in the tight space of the car. They drove in heavy silence. Each tick of the clock felt like an eternity as memories of shadows curled around their minds. The sky overhead thickened with clouds as a gathering storm threatened to mar their escape from the darkness that clung to them like a shroud. The thrumming silence was broken only by the sound of rain beginning to fall, gentle taps that felt almost like a heartbeat. But the rain grew heavier, pounding against the roof like frantic claws. Visibility dropped, and in the dim glow of the headlights, the fog began to creep closer again, slithering through the cracks in the windows like a living thing desperate to get inside. Shadows darted along the roadside, flickering just out of sight, and their hearts raced at the thought of what lingered beyond their view. A darkness filled with eyes that were always watching. "Mark, you have to go faster," Emily urged, her voice edged with rising desperation. The hairs on her neck prickled as she glanced at the rearview mirror, her breath hitching as she caught a flash of movement just outside the light. "It's coming." "No, no, no," Jake muttered, his eyes wide with dread. He turned in his seat, bracing for a confrontation with whatever dark force hunted them. "It can't be. We left it behind." But it was already too late. As Mark pressed down harder on the gas pedal, the rain turned to a torrential downpour, obscuring their view further and turning the desert into a winding river of shadows. They could see it now, shapes forming in the mist, the laughing echoes growing louder, wrapping around them like a noose. "What if we didn't leave? What if we never left?" Emily whispered as the chilling thought struck her. The idea took root in her mind, sinking deep like a thorn. What if this is just the beginning? Suddenly, the engine sputtered, a primal sound that overshadowed the growing storm. Mark's heart sank as he wrestled with the steering wheel, fighting against the sudden loss of power. "No! Come on!" he screamed at the car, panic flooding his veins. With a final sputter, the car lurched to a halt, the headlights flickering and dying, leaving them in utter darkness under the oppressive weight of the storm. Rain dripped steadily, sounding like whispered secrets. The air thick with fear, the wind howled like a grief-stricken ghost, filling the silence with its chilling cries. "Get out! We have to run!" Emily shouted, adrenaline surging as she flung open her door, the rain drenching her instantly. She ran toward the bleak outline of an abandoned gas station ahead, hoping for any form of refuge. "Emily, wait!" Mark yelled, but fear propelled her forward, leaving the boys scrambling after her. The gas station stood like a broken relic, partially illuminated by erratic lightning that sporadically lit the scene in pale flashes. The windows were cracked, and the sign swung limply in the raging wind. Inside, the atmosphere felt thick with an icy presence, the air heavy with an unsettling stillness. There was something here, something watching. As they stepped inside the dilapidated building, the stench of decay filled their lungs, mingling with mold and dust. Old magazines littered the floor, yellowing and torn, whispering tales of lives long forsaken. A flickering fluorescent bulb buzzed overhead, its intermittent glow throwing monstrous shadows on the walls that danced like specters. "Help us! Help us!" The whispers fluttered again, echoing off the walls, chilling them to the core. "Stop!" Jake shouted, covering his ears as if that could drown out the noise that clawed at his mind. "We have to get out! This place is cursed." Suddenly, a chilling laughter erupted from the shadows, resonating like 1,000 voices woven into one deranged melody. The trio spun around, eyes wide, searching for something, anything in the gloom. The whispers transformed into a cacophony that rattled their souls, each syllable curling around them like a winding serpent. Without warning, from the darkness of the back room, a pair of glowing eyes pierced the shadows, fixed directly on them. The air shifted, carrying an energy that felt alive, thrumming with chaos as the figure slowly emerged. A tall silhouette that grinned wide, its face fragmented and shifting, morphing into forms they recognized, blending into distorted versions of themselves. "Why did you come back?" it hissed, words laced with malice and mocking glee. Timid breaths filled the air as fear gripped their hearts in a vice. "We didn't come back," Emily stammered, stepping backward and bumping into the wall, realizing there was nowhere left to run. The figure laughed again, a sound that twisted their stomachs. "That's not what your souls say. You've always belonged to the dark." Outside, the storm swelled, rain pelting the roof like a drum roll, heightening their unease. Thunder crashed, shaking the ground beneath them, and the lights flickered again, plunging them into darkness. In just a heartbeat, everything changed. A blinding flash illuminated the room, revealing the figure lunging toward them, its jagged teeth glinting like sharpened daggers. "Run!" Mark yelled, instinctively grabbing Emily's hand as they turned to flee, adrenaline propelling them forward. Jake followed close behind, panic overriding fear as they retraced their steps out of the gas station. But the darkness was alive, thrumming with a sentience that seemed to bind them in place, forcing them back into the claustrophobic tension of the building. The doorway loomed before them, but it felt like an impossible distance away, shadows grasping at their ankles, whispering in their ears. "You can't escape what's inside you," the voice taunted. As they burst outside, the rain poured down harder, drenching them instantly. But the air felt different. The whispers receded, leaving an unsettling silence behind. The wind howled, pulling at their clothes and hair, an entity determined to drag them back. "Keep going," Emily shouted again, and they took off down the road, sprinting blind into the night. The sounds of the storm swallowed their footsteps as they fled toward the horizon, desperate for safety but unsure where to find it. Lightning flashed again, revealing warped silhouettes behind them, echoing their every move as the phantom laughter danced on the wind. It was no longer merely a pursuit. It felt like a ritual, a dark symphony composed of their horror, guiding them deeper into despair. And just as despair threatened to consume them, they spotted another flicker of light, a small, desperate glow flickering like a distant beacon. "There! A house!" Jake called, lunging toward it as raw hope surged through his veins. But as they neared the crooked structure, a chill washed over them, a profound sense of dread clawing at their insides. It seemed abandoned, but an instinctive pull urged them forward, the light beckoning like a moth to a flame. "Are you sure we should go in?" Mark hesitated, glancing around as those whispers returned, the weight of their past trailing closely behind. "Then what else do we do?" Emily replied, fear pushing her forward. It's better than out here. With a couple of cautious steps, they ventured onto the porch, the wood creaking like the bones of the house protesting their presence. The door hung slightly ajar, swaying back and forth in an ominous rhythm. They exchanged anxious glances, caught between temptation and terror, then pushed the door open further, stepping into the dim light that felt strangely warm, almost welcoming. The interior was filled with old furniture covered in white sheets, much like forgotten relics of another life. Dust motes floated in the beams of light that spilled through cracked windows, illuminating a path further inside. But as they stepped deeper, a sudden chill wrapped around them, suffocating and dark. They could feel a presence, something lingering beyond their sight, quiet yet powerful. It felt like the weight of 1,000 eyes boring down upon them, tracking their every move as the laughter faded into an anticipatory silence, making their skin crawl. "Is anyone here?" Mark called out, his voice trembling in the stillness. No one answered, but the atmosphere shifted, thickening with an unsettling energy that crackled, sending shivers racing along their spines. "We need to find a way to call for help," Emily suggested, but even she felt the doubt hang heavily in the air. "This place feels wrong." Suddenly, they heard a soft thud from somewhere in the depths of the house, like a heartbeat echoing in the silence. The sound was followed by a low, raspy whisper, so faint it barely reached their ears, but the chilling words echoed in their minds. "Stay with us." "What was that?" Jake whispered, dread flooding his features as they shivered. "I don't know," Emily stammered, gripping Mark's arm as they exchanged terrified glances, the shadows in the corners of the room swirling ominously. The thudding intensified, resonating in a rhythm that seemed to pulse from below, summoning them further into the heart of the darkness. Each step they took felt precarious, a balancing act on the edge of an abyss, teasing them with the lure of safety overshadowed by the dread of what lay ahead. As they ventured further through the house, the walls appeared to close in, the once spacious room morphing into a narrow hallway lined with fading photographs. Faces of people who seemed both familiar and unsettling, eyes following their every move. "No, this can't be happening," Emily murmured, her breath quickening. "We aren't welcome here." Before she could say another word, the laughter erupted again, hollow and echoing off the walls, filling the air with a sense of foreboding. "You are always welcome," it belted out, layered with torment, resonating deep within. Suddenly, Mark froze, eyes locking onto a door at the end of the hallway, dark and foreboding, the very essence of dread swirling around it. "We have to leave," he urged. But before they could turn back, the door swung open with a low creak, a breath of wind beckoning, whispering promises of destruction. At that moment, they knew. Whatever horrors lay beyond that door had claimed many before them, and now they were trapped, caught in the web of a history that could not be changed. "Go!" Emily shouted, trying to push through the grip of terror that threatened to paralyze them. But the tendrils of darkness had wrapped around them, pulling them closer to the threshold of fate. Every ounce of instinct screamed for them to run, yet they found themselves drawn to the door, unable to resist the pull of the twisted promise that lurked on the other side. And then, with their last fragment of courage, they pressed forward into the unknown, into the darkness waiting to ensnare them in its embrace, unable to escape the monstrous fate that awaited them. As they crossed that threshold, whispers turned to screams, shoving all rationality aside, plunging them into the unfathomable depths of despair. The house shuddered, as if waking from a long slumber, and a tangible darkness consumed them whole, making sure they'd never escape again. As they crossed that threshold, whispers turned to screams, shoving all rationality aside, plunging them into the unfathomable depths of despair. The air grew dense, wrapping around them like a suffocating fog as the door slammed shut behind them, sealing them off from the last flickers of light and hope. The room they entered was dimly illuminated by a single, flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. Its light struggled to break through the encroaching shadows that seemed to breathe and swell around them like a living entity. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper that appeared to shift and pulse, as if the patterns were alive, swirling in sinister designs. Each damp corner of the room oozed decay, the scent of mildew and something far more foul mingling to create a nausea-inducing fog. In front of them stood an old wooden table, marred by deep scars that ran across its surface. Dried stains splotched the grain, hints of something that couldn't be categorized by mere blood or dirt. The unsettling presence thickened in the air, a tension that felt almost electric as it crackled against their skin. "What is this place?" Jake whispered, as if speaking would draw the shadows nearer. Before anyone could respond, the ground trembled beneath them, sending chills racing down their spines. The thudding noise intensified, each beat punctuating the silence like a heavy drum, resonating from deep within the bowels of the house. It felt like a heartbeat, loud, slow, deliberate, drumming a dirge that promised despair. "Is someone down there?" Emily shouted, her voice echoing back at them, hollow and foreboding. But her call was met only with an oppressive silence that gnawed at their thoughts, sending tendrils of fear creeping up their spines. Suddenly, the bulb above them sputtered out completely, plunging them into a darkness that felt like a physical presence, suffocating and cold. Panic set in, and Mark fumbled for his phone to produce a feeble light. The weak beam cut through the dark, illuminating the immediate area, but failed to chase away the shadows that writhed just beyond its reach. With trembling hands, he swept the light across the room, revealing more of the disturbing details around them. The walls appeared etched with strange symbols, runes that seemed to twist and writhe, as if pulsating in time with the ominous heartbeat beneath their feet. "Look!" Jake pointed, voice quaking. As he spoke, the light caught something lurking in the far corner of the room. A shape molded from darkness, its form distorted but undeniably human. A child, perhaps no older than 10, stood there with hollow eyes, staring blankly, an unsettling grin stretching across its face that didn't quite belong. "Help us," it croaked, voice a raspy echo of despair. All rational thought fled as the creature took a shuffling step closer, its body twitching unnaturally with jerks and stops, like a marionette with tangled strings. "They want you to stay," it continued, laughter bubbling in its throat, a sound that rang with madness and echoing triumph. "What the hell is that?" Jake shouted, stumbling back into Mark and Emily, their eyes wide with horror as the child's laughter resonated through the room, entwining with the rhythm of the heartbeat that pulsed louder in response. "Don't look at it!" Emily yelled, spinning on her heels to find a way out, her heart pounding like a frantic bird. But the walls seemed to shift around them, closing in and warping their sense of direction. They were trapped within the terrifying embrace of the house. "No! Get away from me!" Mark yelled as the creature took another step forward, its grin growing wider, impossibly stretching beyond the limits of human anatomy. The shadows behind it roiled, writhing in tandem, as if feeding off the fear in the air. "What do we do?" Jake stammered, glancing around frantically. His heart raced as he felt the room constrict around them, the air thickening in an oppressive silence. "Run!" yelled Mark, but the command felt futile as the floor began to shake more violently, fissures cracking across the wood below them. In that moment of chaotic fear, the air was charged with energy, as if the house itself were alive, drawing strength from their terror. With every thud of the unseen heartbeat, shadows loomed larger, clawing at the edges of their vision, twisting into grotesque figures that mocked their plight. "Over there!" Emily pointed to a doorway at the far end of the room, now slightly ajar, a glimmer of hope amid the despair. They rushed toward the opening, propelled by sheer instinct. The air grew colder, ice prickling their skin as they stumbled through the threshold into yet another room. This one was filled with dust-covered furniture draped in white sheets, like spectral figures waiting to reveal their secrets. Without time to catch their breath, Emily shoved a table aside, her heart racing. The sound echoed, crimson tendrils of fear coursing through her veins. Scrambling, She began throwing sheets aside, seeking any means of escape, when suddenly the laughter returned, echoing all around them, rising and twisting in glee. Join us, join us. The voices taunted, echoing from everywhere and nowhere, enveloping them in a cacophony of despair. Mark stopped, breathless, scanning the walls for some clue, but his gaze came to rest on a strange mirror, hanging crooked, covered in grime. As he approached, unease washed over him, the deep reflection showing not only his visage but something dark lurking just behind him, a creature with elongated limbs and a gaping maw filled with rows of jagged teeth, its form flickering in the glass as if caught between worlds. "Mark, don't look at it!" Jake shouted, but it was too late. The figure grinned, locking eyes with him through the mirror, and Mark felt his strength drain, an oppressive air closing in. The creature whispered promises of power, of freedom from this horrifying realm, if only he surrendered. The temptation was sweet, almost intoxicating, and for a moment, doubt crept in, shadowing his thoughts with uncertainty. "No, you can't!" Emily shrieked, breaking through the haze, lunging toward him just as the room began to shake with a fierce intensity, the very structure groaning under the weight of something far darker. But the mirrored figure reached through the glass, extending a gnarled hand toward Mark, pulling at him with insatiable hunger. The shift in reality was palpable, a crack in the fabric of their world rendering them helpless. In a burst of desperation, Emily grasped Mark's wrist, wrenching him back. "We have to keep moving," she yelled, the urgency echoing in her heart. With sheer force, they turned away from the mirror, rushing toward the far side of the room. Howling winds erupted outside, shaking the windows, the storm now a furious crescendo of sound, intertwining chaos with their own fears. And as they barreled toward another door, the distance felt infinite, with the shadows reaching, clawing, desperate to reclaim what they wanted. "They're trying to take us?" Jake gasped, glancing back. The child stood grinning in the doorway they had just passed, laughter trailing behind them like a specter. As they burst through the next door, they stumbled into a hallway that felt impossibly long, stretching ahead into a murkiness that threatened to engulf them. Every step echoed, a reminder of their fragility, while the shadows danced in mocking rhythm, whispering promises of torment. "Keep going. Don't stop," Emily urged, her voice laced with panic, heart racing as the walls seemed to close in, the heartbeat still pulsing, steady, mocking. The air grew thick with despair, each inhalation filled with the scent of rot and decay. Desperation surged through them as they sprinted down the hall, fueled by fear alone. An old painting hung on the wall, its canvas warped and cracked, and for a fleeting moment, they thought they saw their own reflections shifting within it, transforming into grotesque versions of themselves, mocking smiles, distorted faces. "I can't take this anymore," Jake screamed, his voice breaking as the shadows coiled around them, sapping their willpower. They rounded a corner, nearly slipping on the slick wooden floor, when suddenly the thudding noise returned, echoing directly beneath them, louder and more insistent. The ground split open unexpectedly, a gaping maw swallowing the floor, a pulsing darkness beneath radiating an insatiable hunger. And oh, they screamed in unison as they rushed to the nearest door, flinging it open, just hoping it led somewhere safe. The moment they stepped in, the smell of damp earth hit them like a tidal wave. They found themselves in what appeared to be a basement, dark, low ceiling, the earth itself pressing down around them. Rows of wooden crates lined the walls, and in the center of the room lay a cold stone altar surrounded by flickering candles, all of which seemed to burn with a light fed by the shadows themselves. "Look!" Jake pointed, fear rushing back, as a low murmur began to circle around them. Etched into the stone slab were more of those bizarre runes, glowing faintly, pulsating with an eerie rhythm, racing in tempo with the heartbeat they had been hearing all night. And then they noticed something else. Shadows coalescing on the far side of the room, figures emerging from the darkness, human shapes blurred between realms. "Stay away!" Mark shouted, stepping protectively in front of Emily. But it was too late. The figures had formed, faces twisting in agony, mouths stretched wide in. Eternal screams. They recoiled, heart racing as the realization dawned upon them. These were the lost souls, the ones who had been drawn here, their existence tied to that darkness. The air grew cold, frost creeping up their skin as the spirits reached out, thin fingers curling towards them as if trying to pull them into their living hell. "No!" Emily shrieked, stepping back, but the shadows surged forward, the darkness hungry for more lives to consume. Flashes of memories flickered, visions of their own lives, moments of mundanity juxtaposed with each moment of terror they had faced. The ground trembled again, sending remnants of the floor crumbling away as the altar throbbed with dark energy. The sound of laughter erupted, filling the air with manic glee. "Join us," they cried, voices intertwining in a chorus of despair. "Run! We have to run!" Mark shouted, seizing Emily's hand and pulling her toward the opposite wall, where a narrow exit lay hidden in shadows. But as they rushed toward it, the mists thickened, swirling, wrapping around them as they struggled to break free from the clutch of the darkness. In that desperate moment, Emily screamed out, "We can't give up! We can't!" With renewed determination, they fought against the shadows, the weight of despair pushing down like lead. Together they sprinted towards the opening, the chilling sensation wrapping around them like fingers trying to hold them back. And as they lunged through the narrow opening, breathless and terrified, they found themselves in another room, this one dimly lit but quiet, at least for a moment. The air felt lighter, almost hopeful, despite the feeling that something still lurked just beyond their sight. Exhausted but far from broken, they scanned the room for any signs of life or perhaps a way out. Old newspapers littered the floor, faded articles about disappearances, tales of curses, and terrifying local legends that seemed to mock their plight. They committed each word to memory, knowing they were caught in a web spun of fear and darkness, a cycle that had ensnared others before them. "Look," Jake pointed to a window at the far end, glass cracked and cobwebbed, giving a glimpse of the storm still raging outside. "We can escape through there." But before they could move, the floorboards creaked ominously, and a menacing shadow cascaded across the room, blotting out the faint light. Their hearts sank as familiar laughter rang out, cold and unyielding, an echo that promised they were far from free. "No!" Emily shouted, eyes widening as figures materialized, their forms shifting in the half-light, slowly leaking into view, surrounding them. The very air grew thick, hungering for their fear, the room trembling with anticipation as the darkness wriggled with excited energy. "Trapped again," Jake whispered, his voice barely audible as panic clawed at his throat. The figures closed in, the twisted faces of the lost drawing ever nearer, undulating, whispering, their breath colder than ice. "You should stay," they beckoned, voices overlapping with one another, crafting a siren song of despair that promised relief from their suffering if only they surrendered. In the face of encroaching terror, a flicker of resolve ignited within them. "We won't join you," Mark shouted, his voice resonating against the oppressive weight of their presence. "We are not yours to take." And suddenly, the world around them shifted. The floor shook violently, a mirror to their own burgeoning strength, as they pushed back, igniting a spark of defiance in the heart of the dread. The figures recoiled, their contorted faces twisting in anger and confusion at the sudden defiance radiating from the trio. Shadows flickered and danced like flames caught in a disturbing wind, shifting their forms into something even more grotesque. The oppressive weight of despair that had suffocated the moments before now cracked and splintered, giving way to a surge of adrenaline. "Stay together," Emily shouted, heart hammering as the haunting bodies lunged forward. In that chaotic moment, a door appeared through a fog of despair, almost like a mirage, a shimmering portal that flickered with hope amid the encroaching darkness. "Over there!" Jake cried, pointing towards the door. They dashed across the room, but as they approached, the air grew increasingly cold, a biting chill slicing through them. The ominous shadows clawed at their heels, eager to reclaim what they thought was theirs. The whispers turned shrill, a cacophony of voices wailing in fury, promising torment and despair if they dared to escape. Just as they reached for the handle, the door slammed shut with an ear-piercing bang, trapping them in the small room with the advancing shadows. Mark felt a rush of terror, their chances of escape slipping away. "What do we do?" he shouted, panic threading through his voice, eyes darting around for a way out. The laughter returned, echoing against the walls, a cruel symphony that promised to feast on their fear. A shiver ran down their spines as they felt the ground beneath their feet tremble, the floorboards creaking ominously as if warning them of the imminent danger. Desperation clouded their judgment, visions of their lives outside this nightmarish place flashing before their eyes, lost in the grasp of the blackness that threatened to overtake them. "Find something to defend ourselves," Emily yelled, her voice rising above the monstrous laughter. Mark and Jake scrambled through the debris, throwing aside old crates and rotten furniture, searching for anything that could provide a semblance of protection. They found a rusted pipe, jagged and heavy. It would have to do. Tightening their grip on it, Mark felt a flicker of hope kindled in his heart. They were cornered, but they wouldn't relinquish themselves without a fight. With renewed determination, they stood back to back, the shadows closing in around them, their eerie whispers clawing at the edges of their resolve. "You can't escape," one particularly haunting voice murmured from the depths of the dark. "You belong to us now." A sudden gust of wind blew through the room, extinguishing the flickering candles and plunging them into almost complete darkness. Jake felt a rush of cool air, a breeze that carried the faintest scent of earth and death, sending waves of nausea washing over him. Panicking, he could barely hear himself think over the relentless thumping of his heart pounding in his ears. Suddenly, an unseen force swept through the air like icy fingers brushing against their cheeks, just for a moment, sending a sickening chill through Mark, who stood silently recalling the monstrosities that had stalked them through this hellish nightmare. He turned, peering into the depths of the darkness surrounding them, heart pounding, praying for just a glimpse into the shadows. Instead, a form detached from the void, an elongated figure with a grotesque, unnatural smile, eyes glimmering with cruel delight, looming closer. "They just want to play," it hissed, its voice a low whisper that grated against their minds, filled with malice and hunger. The tension in the air snapped as they felt the shadows surge forward, reaching for them with spectral hands that distorted reality. "Move!" Emily shouted, swinging the rusted pipe with all her strength. It connected with something tough but brittle, and the figure let out a horrible shriek, echoing throughout the dark space. The sound reverberated through the room, almost tangible, vibrating their bones with dread. But the effect was immediate. Instead of retreating, the shadows reacted, violently, shrieking in unison as they began to change. The figures multiplied, disjointed limbs stretching outwards, thickening, as if the darkness itself expanded and flickered like flames. Any glimmer of hope began to wither away beneath the onslaught of their nightmarish forms. "Keep fighting," Mark shouted back, fighting to focus. He swung the pipe again, adrenaline surging as he struck another monstrous hand reaching for them. It sizzled like a flame touching water, releasing a stench of burnt flesh that filled the air. In that moment, clarity washed over him. This was not just a fight for survival, but a battle against despair itself. They had to outmatch the shadows, to show them their resolve and refuse to be consumed. Emily joined him, swinging her makeshift weapon frantically, narrowing their focus on the advancing shadows. But the shadows began to shift again, ripping through the walls, seeping under doors, adopting every corner of the room. The air became impossibly heavy, thickening with malevolence, as more horrid visions emerged from the depths, figures resembling those they had seen in the hall. The lost souls, their faces warped with an agony that spoke of eternal torment. "No! No!" Jake echoed, shaking with fear, as he backed against the wall, almost losing hope. "We have to, ah!" A hand lunged from the darkness and grabbed his arm, ice-cold fingers wrapping around him, pulling him into the void. He struggled and fought, but the specter's grip only tightened, draining his spirit, pulling forth memories of fear and failure, dissolving his very essence. "Jake!" Emily screamed, clutching the pipe with trembling hands. Without hesitation, Mark lunged forward, smashing the pipe against the ghastly arm, feeling a rush of satisfaction as it recoiled, a hoarse shriek echoing through the room as the darkness twisted and writhed in pain. But then, to their horror, the shadows retaliated. They grew bolder, arms reaching with desperation, inflating as if fed by their fear and anguish. The hissing whispers morphed into a rhythmic chant, echoing a sinister invitation. Join us forever." With resolve, Emily and Mark shifted their focus to Jake, determined to pull him free. They couldn't let him go. Together, they swung in unison, their hearts hammering against the oncoming darkness. The shadows writhed and recoiled, but they would not retreat without more violence. The figures surged forward, mouths opening wide, revealing rows of teeth, angry, sharp, eager to consume everything in their path. Each attempt to fight back felt insubstantial against the weight of despair pressing down on them. Meanwhile, a flicker of brightness broke through the oppressive aura, a fleeting ray of light filtering through the cracks in the wall. "Over there!" Emily pointed, eyes wide with hope. "We need to reach that light." With a determined nod, they thrust themselves forward, fighting against the thrumming shadows that sought to pull them back. In a frenzy, they plunged through the mass of dark tendrils, swinging the pipe wildly, desperate to maintain their momentum. But as they drew closer, the shadows began to shift again, twisting and contorting into figures they recognized. Friends, family, figures from their past, seeking to snatch them from their reality. Faces they had long forgotten now adorned with pain and despair. "Remember us?" A familiar voice crooned from the shadows, sweet and sickening, dripping with nostalgia and sorrow. "You left us, we waited. Now you can be with us forever." Tears welled in Mark's eyes as he caught sight of his younger brother, who had vanished years ago, his smile stretched into a malevolent grimace that matched the others in that moment. "No," he choked out, battling against his own emotions. "I can't." With every ounce of will, he fought to push the memories and images away. They blurred as the darkness threatened to overwhelm him, but somehow, the flicker of hope had ignited a fire within him. "We don't belong to you," he screamed defiantly, breaking the illusion and forcing himself to move forward. With renewed fervor, Emily and Jake followed his lead, ignoring the chains of memory seeking to bind them. They reached the source of light, an opening leading to another room, one bathed in a soft glow, untouched by the malice that lingered in this house. But as they stepped through the doorway, the laughter swelled, a piercing cacophony of rage that vibrated their very souls. "You can't escape." The shadows lunged towards them, desperate to reclaim what they had lost. Drawing deeper on their strength, they leaped into the warm light, hoping it would shield them from the lurking threat. But the moment they crossed the threshold, the darkness roared, a shattering cry that reverberated through the hall like a living wall of sound. In the new room, they found themselves in a different world, one that felt almost serene, illuminated by soft golden light. But something felt off, the air thick with a subtle pressure, the atmosphere charged with unease. They could still feel the echoes of despair whispering in the back of their minds. "Are we safe?" Jake murmured, wiping the sweat from his brow. Mark squinted, searching their surroundings, and suddenly, the peaceful ambience shattered as the whispers returned, louder, more insistent, clawing at the edges of reality. "You can't escape us. We are always here." They turned, and the walls around them pulsed, shifting again, revealing scenes of life and death, a cycle of souls that had ebbed and flowed through the house. The light flickered, shadows clawing at the edges of the room, hungry for the taste of fear. It's like they're following us. Emily breathed, a sense of dread washing over her. No, Mark replied, tension lacing his voice. The house itself can't trap us if we keep moving. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked in darkness, its eyes glowing with an unnatural hue, the embodiment of fear. The air crackled as it spoke, voice dripping with malice. You thought you could escape? This place will consume you, body and soul. With that, it lunged towards them, tendrils of shadow reaching out, encircling them. They stumbled back, hearts racing, fighting to gain their bearings in the shifting world around them. A fierce determination ignited a fire in their chests. This couldn't be the end. Back to back, Emily shouted, mirroring their earlier position as they faced the encroaching dark. Together, they felt stronger, fueled by their resolve to survive against all odds. They began to chant quietly, a mantra against despair. But it was not enough. Shadows thickened around them, roaring as they pulled closer, and the cacophony of anguished whispers sang a mournful tune, sowing doubt in their hearts. Remember, this place takes what it wants, a familiar yet hollow voice crooned in Mark's ear. Fingers of ice traced along his spine as specters of memories tore at his consciousness. Moments of weakness, fears that had held him back. But in that darkness, he could also feel the presence of his friends, their warmth. They were not alone. Fight, he shouted, blasting the shadows with sheer willpower. Rallying their spirits, he picked up the pipe once more, launching forward with ferocity, piercing through the veil of darkness. The shadows screamed as if stung, momentarily losing form, flickering in a chaotic frenzy. Emily joined the effort, swinging wildly, their combined strength pushing back against the encroaching despair. Stay strong. We can do this, Jake yelled, exhilaration breaking through his fear as he threw off. That icy grip of despair, fueling his friend's courage. With the darkness momentarily distracted, they dashed towards the only exit visible, a staircase winding upwards, hinting that perhaps freedom waited beyond. Heart racing, they sprinted, clambering up each step, praying they could break free of the horrors below them. But behind, they felt the shadows closing in, raging against their defiance. You cannot run, they bellowed, voices echoing with a fury that chilled their bones. The steps beneath them moaned and shook, threatening to buckle under the wrath of the darkness. Go! Don't look back! Mark urged, his encouragement propelling them into a sprint. They pushed forward, adrenaline lending power to their limbs, heartbeats synchronizing in a final, desperate escape. Finally, they reached the top, where a heavy door stood ajar, light spilling through the cracks, shimmering like a beacon. Hope surged within them as they flew toward it, flinging the door wide. But just as they crossed the threshold, they felt an overwhelming force pulling them back, threatening to shatter their hopes. You can't leave! The shadows howled, banshee-like screams echoing through the once serene hallway. No! They shouted in unison, bracing themselves against the pull. They closed their eyes, drew upon every ounce of strength they could muster, and pushed through the barrier of darkness. With a final surge, it felt as if time stretched infinitely as they broke free, tumbling into blinding light. The heavy silence of the shadows shrieked behind them, a final cry of despair as they landed on soft grass, the scent of earth and sky flooding their senses. But as they lay on the grass, gasping for breath, a gnawing dread crept into their hearts. The air felt too still, too quiet, disconcerting in its calmness, like the world was holding its breath. They had escaped the clutches of the darkness, but a heavy sense of foreboding wrapped around them like a suffocating shroud. The sky, once bright and friendly, was now a sickly gray, a pallor hanging like a curtain over the land. Wisps of fog rolled across the ground, curling around their ankles, slow and deliberate. The unsettling feeling of being watched crawled across the back of their necks, leaving goosebumps in its wake. It looks abandoned, Emily whispered, scanning their surroundings. Broken trees twisted in the distance, their branches like gnarled fingers reaching out in desperation. The remnants of a decrepit house stood nearby, its windows shattered, black holes staring back at them like empty eyes. "Let's get up." Mark tried to regain his composure, but his voice trembled. "We need to find a way back to the road away from here." As they stood, the ground seemed to shift beneath them. Sudden movement in the periphery made their hearts leap, and they turned to see the distant shadows from the house begin to sway, looming, gathering strength. They could feel the malevolence clinging to the air, as if it seeped from the very soil around them. "Didn't we leave them behind?" Jake asked, his voice a low tremor. Panic began to rise within him, a repressed fear bubbling to the surface. Before anyone could respond, the wind picked up, howling around them, sending a chill racing down their spines. It carried an echoing whisper, a dark promise twisted into an unnatural sound. The laughter, haunting and sinister, returned, reverberating through the trees and rattling the very air they breathed. "Stay close," Emily ordered, trying to project courage. As they started to walk toward the grove of trees, the grass seemed thicker, more resistant, like it was trying to hold them back. With each step, the memory of the shadows loomed just beyond their consciousness, a creeping dread that whispered of their return. "I can't shake the feeling that we're still trapped," Mark murmured, a knot tightening in his stomach. He fought to keep his gaze forward, to remain focused, but the dense fog shrouded everything in eerie uncertainty. A sudden noise pierced the stillness, a raspy, shuffling sound coming from behind them. They spun around, hearts racing. The door of the abandoned house creaked open slowly, its hinges screaming as if in protest. A figure, thin and gaunt, emerged from the shadows of the doorway. Its skin hung loosely on its frame, dark hollows where eyes should be, mere voids that seemed to suck in the light. "Please let me go," it wheezed, voice brittle and breaking. Though it spoke as if pleading, its movements were disjointed and jerky, limbs bending at unnatural angles, the very definition of wrongness. "Run!" Jake shouted, pure instinct driving him as he yanked Emily away from the sight. They bolted toward the trees, hearts pounding like war drums, adrenaline fueling their escape. They could hear the shuffling, gaining speed behind them. Whatever that thing was, it was relentless. The trees loomed ahead, their branches twisted and twisted again, like skeletal fingers reaching out as if to pull them in. The fog thickened with each passing second, enveloping them, making it hard to breathe. As they entered the wooded area, a suffocating silence fell, interrupted only by the sound of their hurried breaths. "Which way?" Mark gasped, his eyes darting around in a panic as he stumbled over roots that snaked across the ground. The forest seemed to have a mind of its own, leading them deeper into the maze of dark foliage. Shadows draped themselves over their path, and they were painfully aware of the eyes lurking just beyond the veil of darkness. "Keep moving," Emily urged, gripping Jake's hand tightly. Her instinct screamed at her to flee further, deeper, urging them onward in a desperate bid for survival. "We can't let it catch us." But even as they ran, the sounds grew louder, the flapping of something enormous, wings throbbing in the air around them. It felt as if the forest itself was alive, vibrating with a disquieting energy. Branches snapped as if something pursued them, scuttling behind the trees, eager to reach them, hungry to reclaim what had almost slipped through its grasp. "Look," Mark pointed, spotting a faint glow between the trees, a soft, warm light that shimmered like a beacon in the sinister shadows. "There's something up ahead." With that flicker of hope to guide them, they dashed toward the light, desperation fueling their every step. But as they neared, a chilling realization washed over them. The light was not welcoming. It flickered and pulsed with a beating heart, illuminating twisted faces caught in agonized expressions. "Wait!" Jake shouted, skidding to a stop. "What is that?" Emerging from the glow was a mass of shadowy figures, their bodies writhing and undulating, entangled in despair, heaped upon despair, dragging them inward. The flickering light pulsed with energy, throwing more twisted forms into view. Faces familiar, yet warped, like memories dredged up from the deepest nightmares. "No!" Mark shouted in despair as recognition struck him hard. All were familiar faces, friends and loved ones lost to the grasp of the darkness they had narrowly escaped. Each seemed to reach out toward them, sobbing silently, their mouths moving in desperate pleas. "Help us," one cried, its voice distorted, laden with pain. Its eyes were pools of darkness. "You can't leave us behind. You have to help us." Emily recoiled, her heart aching at the sight. "They're trapped, we have to save them." But Mark felt a sharp tug of fear. "No, don't listen. It's a trick," he insisted, pulling her away. "We can't get caught again. We need to get out of here now." But it was too late. The figures began to converge, their whispers rising to a chorus of anguish. A magnetic force pulling Emily further into the glow that had promised hope, but now felt like a curse. "Join us. Complete us," the voices beckoned, their pleas wrapping around Emily like chains, tightening until she felt she could no longer breathe. Swirls of memories filled her mind, dredging up secrets she had buried deep, fears she had tried to forget. "No, I won't," she shouted, shaking her head violently. But the air shimmered with their cries, drowning out her protests in a sea of sorrow. Gripping Jake, Mark yelled, "We can't give in. Fight it, Emily." With all her strength, she wrenched herself away from the light, locking eyes with her friends. A fierce determination surged within her, rekindling the fire she thought had been snuffed out. They were in this together, and she wouldn't let the darkness take them. As if awakened by their defiance, the chorus of trapped souls howled in rage, the forest quaking around them. The light flickered violently, revealing more of the horrid figures, and the air became thick with a choking fog, obscuring their vision. "We have to keep moving," Mark shouted, and they stumbled back, retracing their steps, fighting against the tide of despair crashing around them. The trees strained against their every movement, branches snapping like bones, shadows reaching out as if they wanted them back. The ground beneath them pulsed, as if the very earth yearned to swallow them whole, dragging their feet into a warm, sticky mud that clung like hands of the damned. Eyes darting, they searched for any semblance of an escape. But as they pressed forward into the grasping darkness, the figures seemed to multiply, vision warped by panic, laughter echoing around them, a haunting reminder of their fears. "I can't," Jake gasped, his legs trembling beneath him, the feeling of heavy dread almost paralyzing. "Just a bit further," Emily urged, pushing through the landscape of fear that sought to engulf them. The trees began to clear ahead, an opening forming in the dense woods illuminated by the pale light of a full moon. Just when relief washed over them, they heard the sound. A terrible screeching call echoed through the woods, chill-inducing and primal. From above, a silhouette emerged, gliding down, wings blocking out the moonlight. The massive creature took shape, dark feathers, eyes blazing with otherworldly fire, a sinister satisfaction in its gaze. "It's here," Mark whispered, realization dawning as the creature hovered closer. And as it drew nearer, Emily caught the stark truth. It was the embodiment of everything they had fought against, an entity that demanded sacrifice. "We have to fight it." Mark stepped forward, brandishing the pipe once more, its surface now slick with the darkness that plagued them. The creature paused, its crimson eyes narrowing, feeding on their fear, gauging their resolve. "We won't let you take us," Mark shouted defiantly, swinging the pipe, the sound echoing against the trees. But the creature dove in a flash, swift and merciless. They barely had time to react as it knocked the pipe from Mark's hands, sending it clanging into the underbrush. Thrashing and retreating, they felt the air compress around them, darkness tightening around their throats like an iron vice. "Hold on," Emily yelled, grabbing Jake as they made a desperate dash towards the opening in the trees, feet pounding against the forest floor. The entity's screech found a new pitch, nauseating, enraged as it gathered speed, chasing them through the night. The moonlight danced ahead, promising freedom, safety, But with every step, the shadows surged, the figures all around warping into monstrous shapes, faces distorting with a maddening rage. They burst into the clearing, feeling the pull of the dark fading behind them. But when they turned to catch their breath, the oppressive shadows wrapped around the clearing, painting it in shades of despair. Mirages of the lost souls surrounded them, reaching out, faces shifting between horror and pleading as they clawed for release. "Run!" Jake shouted again, but as they turned to flee, the ground beneath them trembled violently. An earthquake of darkness surging upwards, chasms opening wide, threatening to swallow them whole. "Mark!" Emily cried as she stumbled, feeling the earth give way beneath her feet. Fingers desperately grasped to pull her back, but the shadows swirled like a tempest around them, mocking and hungry. The earth groaned as memories shattered. Hope flickered and waned. The entity was there with them, looming darkly, waiting for the final moment to strike. "You are ours," it hissed, the words heavy with inevitability. But then, something shifted in the air, an unfamiliar warmth. A beacon shone through the suffocating haze, a blinding light piercing the shadows, illuminating everything around them. "What is that?" Mark breathed, his heart racing again with a sense of hope. The light expanded, filling the space, and a strong wind blew through, scattering the darkness. The shadows recoiled, screaming, whirling away from the brilliance that washed over them. Emily squinted against the brightness, stunned. "Maybe this is our way out," she whispered, trying to fight the gaping maw of despair still trying to drag her back. "Together!" Mark shouted, grabbing their hands. With the darkness swirling around them like a sinister storm, they sprinted towards the light, hearts pounding in unison. As they approached, the entity screeched, its shape shifting and writhing, desperately trying to reclaim them. But they burst into the light, an explosion of warmth and brightness enveloping them, erasing the terrifying shadows that sought to drag them down. The world pulsed around them, and for a moment, all became still. They had done it. They had broken the suffocating grip of despair. "I think it's gone," Jake panted, looking around at the fading darkness behind them, his heart still racing. But even as they stood there, something glimmered in the depths of the light. The air shimmered, revealing a door, an ethereal portal hovering inches above the ground, glinting like polished glass. However, a nagging fear began to creep back, the realization that they were still not truly free. "Is this the way out?" Emily asked, uncertainty in her voice. "Or another trap?" Mark stepped forward, peering closely, heart pounding. Maybe it's a chance to find the others, or return, to make sense of all this. But just as hope sparked again, the shadows began to swirl around the edges of the light, creeping closer, their whispers a haunting reminder of what they had escaped. "If we don't decide, they will take us again," Jake insisted, readiness flashing in his eyes as he took a step toward the shimmering door, a light illuminating his face even as the shadows encroached. "Together, we can face this," Emily said, courage bubbling up once more. The moment brought them closer together, a bond forged from shared fears and the resolve to break free once and for all. As they steadied themselves before the shimmering portal, the air around them thickened with unease. The shadows still slithered, inching closer to the light, their whispering voices rising to a dissonant crescendo like a sorrowful choir lamenting the loss of their prey. It felt as if the very fabric of the woods vibrated with a shared sense of desperation, a longing to reclaim what it had almost ensnared. "Go through before it's too late," Jake urged, anxiety tight in his throat. The whispers grew louder, pressing against his mind, crawling beneath his skin like an army of ants, demanding attention, inciting fear. Emily hesitated, glancing back at the veiled darkness that now danced hungrily around the edges of the portal. Shapes shifted in the shadows, their forms so close, yet just out of reach. Flickers of familiar faces appeared and vanished in moments. A friend from childhood, a beloved pet, voices from the past urging her to come back, to join them in the eternal night. "No," she shouted, shaking her head as tears pricked at her eyes. "We have to break the cycle. We can't go back." Mark's expression hardened, realizing the danger of losing himself to the beckoning phantoms. "Stay focused. We can't let them in," he warned, his heart pounding in time with the ominous whispers that seemed to echo through the very trees. "Step through the portal. Now!" With that command, the weight of their fears exploded into action. They rushed toward the portal, limbs moving almost in slow motion. Each step felt like pushing against a tide of ice, the shadows howling angrily as if sensing their resolve. With focused determination, they plunged into the light, feeling an initial rush of warmth hugging them before everything seemed to swirl and twist. Inside the portal, time felt distorted, stretching endlessly in all directions. Colors bled into one another. Bright greens turned to deep reds, then faded into haunting hues that flared in and out of existence. They stumbled together through a void of uncertainty, each heartbeat echoing louder than the last as they spiraled deeper into this unfamiliar realm. Suddenly, the sensation of running stopped, and they found themselves standing on solid ground once more. But the world around them had transformed into a stark landscape, a twisted version of their own. They stood in a dimly lit corridor, walls lined with peeling wallpaper that oozed a greenish mildew, and floorboards creaked underfoot as though they were alive. A thick, suffocating fog swirled low, swirling around their feet and hiding the true nature of the floor beneath them. The scene felt hauntingly familiar, yet wrong in every possible way, like a nightmare stitched from remnants of a forgotten past. "Where are we?" Jake murmured, his voice trembling, eyes darting to the dim corners. Flickering lights buzzed ominously overhead, making the shadows dance, and twisted reflections glimmered at the edges of his vision. Mark stepped forward, peering into the abyss. "I don't know, but we need to stick together." A chill washed over him as he felt the darkness lurking just beyond their senses. It was palpable, as if the air itself was alive with unseen eyes, watching, judging, waiting for a moment to strike. As they moved down the hall, the soft whispering began again, but this time the voices were clearer, sharper, the tones weaving in and out of comprehension. A child's giggle flitted into earshot, and a cold shiver cascaded down Emily's spine. The sound was too happy, too carefree for such a grim place. The echoes of laughter warped into cries, and the basement of her soul clenched as images of lost innocence stirred uneasily within her. "We shouldn't be here," she whispered, glancing back at her friends, who appeared equally rattled. "This place, it feels wrong." Before she could finish her thought, the corridor abruptly changed, as if someone had flipped a switch. The walls shifted, revealing grotesque portraits, twisting, leering faces that appeared to crawl towards them, mouths gaping in silent screams as a heavy dread squashed against their chests. The candlelight flickered, casting jittery shadows that seemed to elongate and reach for them, sizes that defied logic. "Let's find a way out," Mark urged, refusing to be consumed by fear. They turned a corner, but the corridor seemed to stretch endlessly, twisting and writhing, leading them deeper into uncertainty. A loud crash echoed from nearby. The sound was followed by a piercing shriek that sliced through the air. They froze, hearts pounding furiously. "Did you hear that?" Emily's voice was barely above a whisper. "What was that?" Jake's eyes were wide, reflecting the fear that hung heavy in the air. Then came the sound of dragging, something long and heavy scraping along the floor, growing louder by the second. Mark's pulse raced as he turned back the way they had come. "We need to hide. Now!" They ducked into the nearest room. The door creaked open like a mournful wail. The room inside was dark and cluttered, every corner brimming with half-shadowed objects. An old rocking chair swayed gently in the corner despite the stillness, as if it held the weight of someone unseen. "Hide!" Mark hissed, as they piled into a disheveled closet, clinging to each other in the suffocating darkness. As the door slammed shut, the noise in the hallway grew nearer, the dragging sound accompanied by whispers that slithered under the door. Help us! Help us! Help us! The voices rasped, insistent and unnerving, like a chorus of the damned, begging for release in painful unison. They pressed their hands over their mouths to suppress their terrified breaths, hearts thudding loudly in the silence. From their cramped hiding spot, they could see a shadow creeping beneath the crack of the door. It flitted back and forth, dark fingers curling at the edges, snaking towards them with an insidious purpose. "It's here. It knows we're in here," whispered Jake, his fear palpable. Suddenly, with a violent crash, the door flew open. The haunting figure emerged, barely human, limbs twisted and distorted, eyes void of light and filled only with shadow. The creature moved with unnatural grace, gliding across the floor, searching, snaking its form through the darkness, searching for its prey. The air grew heavier, humid with unspoken dread, as it paused, tilting its mangled head ever so slowly toward their hiding spot. Emily stifled a gasp, holding her breath as the creature's gaze locked onto their closet, a taunting grin stretching across its lips, revealing rows of jagged teeth stained dark as night. "Found you," it hissed, voice dripping with twisted delight. Mark's voice shook as he whispered, "We can't stay here. We have to move now." With a sudden rush of adrenaline, they bolted out of the closet, pushing past the figure just as it lunged. They sprinted into the hallway, hearts pounding as the creature shrieked in rage, an unholy sound that rattled the very air around them. The corridor shifted again, elongating into an endless stretch, shadows whipping around them, wrapping around their legs like the grip of unseen chains. They could hear the distant echoes of the children's laughter like mocking sounds that betrayed their desperation. "Keep going," Emily cried, pushing forward despite the heavy tread of dread in her chest. Desperate to escape the malevolence that chased them, they plunged into an adjacent room, slamming the door shut. A quick glance revealed a dusty, dimly lit space cluttered with cobwebs and broken furniture. It smelled stale and old, as if no one had set foot here for centuries. "We should barricade the door," Mark suggested, eyes scanning for something to block the entrance. But as they turned, an icy chill swept over them, and the air crackled with a peculiar energy. The room felt alive, vibrating with the pulse of their fears. The walls appeared to shift, and as they approached the door, a series of sickening thuds erupted behind it, heavy and relentless, like a predator trying to break through. "Hurry!" Jake urged, grabbing an old bookcase and pushing it against the doorframe. The object screeched against the floor, and the force behind the door intensifying, slamming against the makeshift barrier with jarring violence. "What if it breaks through?" Emily's voice quivered, caught between panic and sheer focus. "It won't. Just keep your back against the door," Mark yelled, squeezing in beside her as they braced for the inevitable. Minutes felt like hours as the creature's pounding continued outside, a nightmarish rhythm that echoed in their ears, fueling the fear that burned through them. They could hear the creature's rasping breaths, feel the heaviness of its presence closing in as it prowled just beyond their fragile sanctuary. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows thickening, painting choking dread all around them. The whispers returned, taunting and seductive, promising freedom if they just dared to open the door. "Just let it in. You think you can hide? We are always here." Then, in a chilling moment, the ground trembled under their feet as a shadow shifted ominously beneath them. The floorboards creaked and moaned like a dying beast, and the lights overhead flickered dangerously, casting eerie silhouettes on the walls. "Hold tight," Mark shouted again, all strength focused on the makeshift barricade and the increasing noise outside. Suddenly, a chilling silence enveloped them. The pounding ceased, leaving an uncomfortable quiet that throbbed in their chests. The only sound was the rasp of their breaths and the faint creaking of the bookcase shifting against the door. "What would happen?" Jake breathed, confusion swirling in his eyes. Then came an unnatural, almost playful giggle, echoing from the other side of the door. Emily turned sharply towards the sound, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. "It's toying with us," she whispered, fear creeping unnoticed up her spine. The doorknob rattled, sending shivers through their spines. A flutter of shadows pooled beneath the crack, swirling violently, whispering promises and threats, lurking for an opportunity to slip through. We can't stay here. We have to get out, Mark urged adamantly, but there was nowhere to run. As they shared a glance, the reality sunk deeper. The barrier was only temporary, a flimsy platform against an encroaching darkness that wouldn't relent. Emily's determination ignited, refusing to cower in fear another moment. Maybe we can fight it if we conjure our strength. Even one of us can face it. Are you serious? Jake exclaimed, panic-laden disbelief in his voice. Think about it. We fought off the dark before. We just need to use that light we felt when we came through. It has to be here somewhere. Just then, the door creaked ominously, and with another tremendous crash, the creature tried breaking through once more, the bookcase shuddering under the weight of despair. Come on, Mark snapped, eyes darting around for anything that could help. Anything we can use. Panic surged with renewed vigor, keeping the darkness at bay as they frantically searched the room, throwing aside useless debris. In a dark corner, a dusty lantern appeared, its glass fogged but still intact. I found something, Mark shouted with a flicker of hope. He rushed to grab it, his hands shaking as he fumbled to pull it into the light. We can light it, focus our thoughts. In that moment, the momentum shifted, rageful pounding returned with a second surge. You think that will save you? The creature rasped, dark presence swirling against the door, overpowering their senses. Feeling the shadows invade, Emily shouted, join hands. Focus together. They quickly linked arms, gathering their strength and centering their thoughts as fear flickered just beneath the surface. As Mark lit the lantern, the flame flickered deeper, illuminating their faces with a warm glow. Hold on to that feeling, whatever light you have left. Light stretched across the walls, pushing back the encroaching darkness, a warm gold against the encroaching gloom. Emily felt a surge wrap around her, empowering her as nothing else had. We can do this. Fueled by that determination, they reached deep within, calling forth every ounce of hope, every flicker of light, letting it swell until it burst from them like a tidal wave. The shadows recoiled momentarily, their whispers shrieking in pain. The creature shrieked furiously, its twisted form writhing in agony against the sudden flame of their unity, its claws scratching desperately at the light. Emily squeezed Jake's hand tighter, drawing strength from the warmth emanating around them. Keep fighting, she cried. As their combined emotions surged, the air crackled and sparked, charged by raw power, and that light flared brighter still. With a final roar, the surrounding shadows shrank back in horror, retreating like mist before the dawn. With that surge of brilliance, the creature let out an ear-piercing wail that echoed through the room, shaking the very foundations. The lantern glowed fiercely. As the lantern shone with an otherworldly intensity, the creature writhed in agony, clawing desperately at the radiant light. Its howls turned into a cacophony of torment, a sound that pierced through the silence, drowning out the whispers that had tormented them for so long. The walls around them pulsed dangerously, the room vibrating as if the very structure of reality was unraveling at the seams. Shadows whipped through the corners, seeking refuge in every crevice, while the brilliant flame pushed forward like a spear, illuminating the grotesque features of the creature, revealing its true form. It was a grotesque amalgamation of faces and limbs, a jigsaw puzzle of horror. Each part seemed to writhe in agony, a symphony of pain brought to life. Eyes bulged and blinked erratically across its twisting body, some filled with an empty void while others recognized them with a malice that chilled the soul. Every breath it took was slow and deliberate, each sigh resonating with a bone-deep dread that wrapped around the trio like an icy shroud. Mark, Jake, and Emily stood rooted to the spot, the light swelling around them like a protective cocoon. "Don't look away," Mark shouted, fighting the urge to recoil from the disconcerting sight. The shadows continued to crash against their barrier, but the warmth of the lantern pushed harder. They could feel the power of unity coursing through them. This was their moment, the culmination of fear transformed into sheer defiance. With renewed will, Jake raised his free arm higher, channeling everything into the flickering flame. "We won't be yours. We refuse." The words ignited something deep within, a spark igniting the flash of light around them, spilling into the crevices of the room, drowning the darkness. The creature shrieked again, the sound a blood-curdling mixture of rage and despair, echoing off the walls until it became almost deafening. The temperature dropped suddenly, and a frosty breath filled the air as a howl of wind rushed past them, swirling like a tide of darkness. It was as if the very essence of the entity was retaliating against their light. The shadows thickened, rushing towards the lantern, tendrils of darkness curling around the bright flame, hungry to extinguish this newfound strength. "Hold on," Emily cried, feeling the sweat bead on her forehead. "Our memories, everything good. Throw those into the flame." With desperation, they closed their eyes and began to recall cherished moments. Laughter shared on sunny afternoons, warm hugs after long nights, bravery in the face of fear. They opened the floodgates of their minds, each memory pouring forth, filling the lantern with an intensity that surged against the darkness. The creature's eyes widened in horror, faces contorting in a sinister snarl as light burst forth like a sun breaking free from a storm. It howled in anguish, the sound echoing through the corridor as its body began to fracture under the onslaught of emotion-fueled light. The once oppressive atmosphere lightened, colors blooming against the grim backdrop of despair. The shadows began to dissipate, retreating to the corners of the room, screeching in terror, whispering frantically among themselves. The figures they once saw in the darkness shifted into vivid light, familiar faces emerging in glimmers of hope. Loved ones appeared, smiling gently, their presence powerful reminders of what was worth fighting for. As the figure began to fracture, the ground shook violently beneath them. The walls, once a prison, now glinted with light, cracks emerging like veins of energy. With one final anguished roar, the creature twisted into itself, collapsing in a swirl of darkness that fanned out and vanished in a blinding flash, leaving behind only a lingering haze of shadows that rapidly evaporated into nothingness. Breathless and exhausted, they stood in the waning light, clutching each other tightly. The oppressive weight that had enveloped them lifted, replaced by an overwhelming wave of relief. The air around them brightened, as if dawn had finally broken upon the cursed doorways they had escaped. "Did we do it?" Jake whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief. "I think so," Mark replied, scanning the room filled with glimmers of warmth. The remnants of fear lingered, but there was a shift, an acceptance of freedom that blossomed among them, softening the hardened edges of their hearts. Slowly, as they stepped forward, the room transformed, the remnants of the malignant energy dissipating like a faded echo. The doorway they once feared now stood invitingly open, sunlight spilling through, bringing with it the sweet promise of a new beginning. With shared glances and tentative steps, they pushed through the threshold into a world glowing with life, laughter, and vibrant memories welcoming them back like an embrace. Each moment felt sacred, each breath a precious gift as they stepped into the light, knowing they had faced their fears and emerged stronger together.